A few months back, my girlfriend and I were bored hanging around the house, and spontaneously decided to go for a hike. We don't go hiking often, but the idea appealed to both of us. And even though there was only about an hour left of light, we figured we had enough time to enjoy a hike before it got too dark. We quickly filled up our water bottles and put on the best walking shoes that we had, and we were out the door, driving up into the mountains. Around my area, there are many hiking trails, with the variety of trails increasing as you go up into the mountains. We tended to stay around the base of the mountains in the occasional case of us hiking, where most people would still be walking, but we wanted to change things up and progressed further up the mountain road to a trail a friend of mine had mentioned. We kept in mind our time and figured that we could hike for a bit, and simply enjoy the new environment for us, and finish up before it was too late. We arrived at the trailhead and see that there are no cars left along the road where the trail commences, but didn't think much of it due to the time. We still had a good 45 minutes until dark, so we continued on. We start walking down a fairly steep hill that then recoups the elevation at the bottom, with an equally steep hill that you have to ascend. We reach the top and then it's smooth sailing from there. We see a lone coyote off the trail a ways off, and some rabbits, and I made a quip about how those rabbits might need to be careful with that coyote lurking around. She playfully hit me for that one. Approximately less than a mile into the trail, we see a large fallen tree that made a bridge over a dried riverbed, and decided to take a rest and climb around on it and take pictures. We were there for about 10 minutes and then resume hiking. We continue on the trail for a short distance, until she hears a rustle in the trees behind us. We stop, mildly spooked due to the assumed size of whatever made that rustling, but continue on, only briefly before she decides she's done, and that we need to head back. It's twilight now, so I agree with her, and we turn around and head back to the car. When we made it back to the fallen tree, my shoe had come untied, so I used the trunk to fix my loose laces, and looked behind us for the first time on the hike. Uncharacteristic of me, but hey, I was having fun, why be paranoid? I see a person that was dressed entirely in black with their hood on, that was a significant distance behind us, walking at a slow, even pace. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, so what if they're wearing black with their hood on? I wear black most of the time and it's cold out. I shouldn't make assumptions. This does trigger me to be more alert, however, and I inform my girlfriend of this person's presence. It's now dusk. We continue on at an intentionally faster pace and go through a winding section of the trail, and I lose sight of the person. When we come around the final bend of the section, I figure they are far behind us, and that there's nothing to worry about. Sooner rather than later, the person is behind us again, but much closer. Probably 50 feet in comparison to 100 feet before. And we had increased our speed, so this alarmed us. We briskly walk around another bend, and as soon as we come around it, we book it. It seemed to be a natural reaction of both of our parts, as we just started running without a word said to initiate it. We are nearing the trailhead now, with only the hills to deal with. We catch our breaths for a moment, and I turn around again. I see the person seemingly halt a sprint upon noticing me looking back, as if they were trying to uphold the illusion of simply walking. At this point, I shout, "Go!" and we sprint down the hill. What little light was left struggled to make its way through the dense trees surrounding us, and the steep hill proved challenging to run down without a clear path to be seen. We both stumbled down the hill, almost falling multiple times and slamming our feet onto rocks and loose brush, but we didn't fall and we didn't look behind us. We make it to the bottom, but must continue up the initial hill and then we will have made it out. We persevere up the incline and make it back to our car. I briefly breathe in relief as I start my car, heart pounded and adrenaline racing. As I reverse onto the road, the person emerges at the trailhead, apparently breathing heavily. We finally got a glimpse of him. His hood had fallen off his head, exposing his pale complexion and dead eyes that were only illuminated by a single lantern at the start of the trail. He was holding something in his hand, but it was too dark to see, and I was not interested in sticking around to make out the object. I shifted to drive and accelerate as fast as my car could muster, leaving him behind in the dust of the empty side of the road. Last year, I was hiking in Virginia. It was a planned 2-day hiking trip, myself and 2 friends. Late into the first day, one of my friends grew ill and decided to turn back. The second friend joined him, just in case it got worse. They told me to go on, and seeing as I had been looking forward to the trip, I did. As evening approached, I came upon a clearing in the forest. On a table surrounded by tools and several cans of spray paint was an elaborate dollhouse. It was large, perhaps 3 feet tall. Its walls and windows were open, as if it had just been built and was drying. That lingering smell of spray paint still hung in the air around it. On the back of the house, a photo had been affixed. It was a family picture, old, perhaps taken in the 80s. Everyone in the picture looked very uncomfortable, like they didn't want to be taking the picture, or they were forced to. Not scared, just very uncomfortable. I left it and continued on so that I might reach my planned campsite by nightfall. The wind had picked up considerably. In the distance, I heard a branch give and fall, crashing to the forest floor, startling me. I found my campsite, but was a bit unnerved by the dollhouse in the middle of nowhere. I realized that I didn't want to camp out in the open where whoever was working on it might stumble upon me. I had one of those little one-person tents that stand just tall enough for a person to lay down in. I set it up behind a thick stand of brush, one side blocked off by a tall stand of rocks. I was glad for this, because not only was I now hidden, but the rocks effectively blocked the heavy winds, which had now turned cold as the frigid air tumbled down from the mountains at night. The sound of the wind churned forest was relaxing, and I think I fell asleep right away. Have you ever been awoken by a loud sound, and you're unsure what it was exactly, but some remnant of it echoes in your mind for a moment after waking? That's what happened to me sometime later, in the pitch dark. I had the sensation that someone was near. I listened intently, trying to hear over the wind. I heard a man's voice of somewhere in the distance, harsh, rapid, and then becoming softer. He was too far away for me to discern what he was saying, but close enough that I could hear inflection and cadence. It sounded like a crazy person scolding himself, and then his voice becoming softer, answering. As I listened, his voice grew louder and louder, until I could hear his clumsy footfalls crashing towards me. He walked by where I was camped, just several feet away from the brush that concealed me. By now my eyes had adapted somewhat to the pale moonlight, but I still couldn't make out anything more than a large, massive shape. He was probably about 6'6", heavily built. He was carrying something long beneath his arm. A rolled-up tent, I guessed. He was angrily talking about someone's face and how it haunted him. His voice then became childlike, and his conversation with himself turned to the topic of cheese and crackers. The dude was clearly off his rocker, that or high on something really good. After a moment, he continued on, his voice receding until I could no longer hear him. I slept little that night afterward. At first light, I butted back the way that I came, back to town. I noticed that the dollhouse was not in the clearing when I passed back by. Whoever the stranger was that night, I'm glad that we did not meet. So, a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western Maryland, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop that we have done frequently, when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches and tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me is that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt, not exactly hiking attire. We decided to set off in the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes down a hill to the headquarters of the park, and is cut out of the mountain bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail and you have to walk single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear, and he wasn't even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. So a bit more walking and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe, as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he is only following closely because he wants to go faster than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing and we pull over. He looks startled and she says hello politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait for him to give some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer and he gets up to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels too wrong about this guy, and we don't want to have to pass him again. So we turn around and we walk back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking. A few minutes of walking up the trail, I look back and I see him walking up the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area that we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There are more people around here, so we felt safer after waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We are talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and he is long gone, or is waiting on the trail where it is more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approach them and ask if they saw anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They tell us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man who was following us. We explain our interaction with him to his wife, and get into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjects and says, "We need to call a ranger." He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick. Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure that we got to our car safely, and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sight of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. So, creepy knife-carrying man in the woods. Let's not meet. So, it's the summer of 2013. I'm 21 and I just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there. There were a few filled sites near the front of the campground, but we purposely requested a site off in the back corner. We were completely by ourselves. During the trip, we planned a whitewater rafting trip for one of the days. We were hiking Mount Washington towards the end of the trip, and thought maybe we would do 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days during the trip were fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast, everything is going great. And so, it's the evening of our 3rd day. We have a roaring fire going. We're all just hanging out at the campsite, drinking and messing around. It's around 9:30 when a disheveled-looking man walks past our site. His clothes are kind of torn and worn out. He had messy, tangled hair, etc. He looked maybe to be in his mid-40s. This wasn't weird though. We all just think that he's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. Around an hour and a half later, we see the same man past our site in the same direction, but this time he's walking slower, almost with a bit of a limp. We're all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just ignored us and keeps walking. Mildly strange, but still, it's probably just someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrap up the night at around 1:30 or 2. The fire is dying down and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I usually find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason, I was having trouble sleeping this night. I get up to take a piss in the woods, and when I do, I see a faint light maybe about 50 to 75 yards ahead of me in the woods. It looks like a dim flashlight or something similar. I decide that I want to investigate. I go back to the tent. One of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it. We get up to investigate, and when we do, the light is no longer on. Feeling a little unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a bit, but don't see anything, so I decide maybe my eyes were playing a trick on me and I head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls that we were camping with. I jump out of my tent as quickly as possible and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming. She screams that there's a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now our whole party is awake and freaking the heck out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what actually happened. She says that she went to pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet from her, not moving like a statue. We're all freaking out, yelling, screaming, making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out too, but try to calm everyone down enough so we can actually do something. We obviously decide to get the heck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles out and throwing everything into the back of our cars, and then we sped out of there. It's around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide to just drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually, at around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open and decide to head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the heck just happened. Some of us think that we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us. Some of the girls think maybe he was purposefully stalking us. Either way, none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with 2 of the other guys. We explain what happened, and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said that there was definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of the guy. They were insanely nice about it though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided that, forget it, we weren't letting one freaky guy ruin our trip. We find another campground a good ways away to stay in. Fast forward 2 days, we're hiking Mount Washington. We get up really early and get to the mountain at around 7:30 to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain when we see the very same guy hiking down, though this time he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy. His hiking clothes are relatively clean. We're all just frozen. A few of us let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with a massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could really happen. We decide to continue hiking up anyways, since he was headed in the opposite direction, and hope that we just never encounter him again. We did finish the hike and luckily didn't see him. After that, we did decide to cut the trip a couple of days short. Looking back on it, we've all come to the conclusion that we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the heck was he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple days later? It was a pretty unnerving and bizarre experience for sure.